They found it buried beneath layers of volcanic ash and silence, etched into stone, arranged with obsessive precision, surrounded by the charred bones of an entire civilization. A language no one had ever seen before. Symbols that defied classification. Glyphs arranged in patterns so deliberate, so calculated, that archaeologists believe they were staring into the final thoughts of a dying people. But this wasn't just another lost script waiting to be deciphered. This was a warning, a message meant for the future. What happened to the people who carved it remains one of the most chilling historical mysteries ever unearthed. Their cities were abandoned overnight. Their temples left mid-ritual. Their children's bones found in positions of worship or sacrifice. And the only thing they left behind was this cryptic, indecipherable language, as if trying to tell us something before they vanished. The deeper researchers dug, the stranger it got. People started to die. Teams went missing. Some who studied the glyphs for too long claimed to hear voices. One expert even gouged his own eyes out after screaming he had read too far. Was it a curse? This was erasure by design. Welcome to the language of the lost, and the final message of a doomed culture. It began like any other excavation. In the spring of 2006, a multinational archaeology team arrived at a remote site near the volcanic highlands of southern Guatemala, an area long thought to hold nothing but charred soil and scattered Mayan ruins. The volcano that had buried this place, long dormant, was considered dead. But what lay beneath its centuries-old ash was far more than anyone had anticipated. They uncovered a city. Not just fragments. A perfectly preserved urban complex, sealed away beneath more than 10 feet of volcanic rock and soil. Entire stone buildings stood intact. Ceremonial platforms still bore signs of recent fire. Bowls were left mid-meal. A mural, vividly painted, had never faded. It was as if time had simply paused. But the deeper they dug, the more it felt wrong. The layout didn't match any known Mesoamerican design. The temples were aligned to celestial patterns unknown to astronomers. And at the city's core stood a black stone monolith, 13 feet tall, covered in deep, angular carvings that no one recognized. It wasn't Mayan. It wasn't Aztec. It wasn't anything. That was the beginning of El Silencio, named for the eerie stillness that surrounded the site, where even birds refused to land. The inscriptions on the monolith were what truly set off the alarm bells. Not just their uniqueness, but their complexity. The symbols weren't decorative. They followed strict mathematical ratios, golden mean spirals, fractal equations, mirrored palindromes. Someone, long before modern history, had embedded advanced geometry into a language carved by hand. The first expert to analyze the glyphs was Dr. Elena Maras, a linguist with the University of Bologna. She claimed the language was entirely synthetic, with internal logic and recursion beyond even Latin or Sanskrit. Within days of examining the glyphs, Maras experienced terrifying dreams. Within a week, she was hospitalized for acute psychosis. She would be the first of many. Photos of the monolith leaked to academic circles, and soon others arrived. Codebreakers, mathematicians, historians. They all came to El Silencio, drawn by the promise of an unknown language. But with each new mind, the mystery deepened. And one discovery in particular broke the rules of time itself. Buried beneath the monolith was a vault. Inside, archaeologists found scrolls made of a strange, silk-like bark, still perfectly preserved. The writing was the same glyphic language, but one scroll stood out. It contained a star chart. And on that chart were constellations arranged in a sky pattern that would only appear in the year 2042. How could a civilization wiped out over 1,000 years ago have predicted the stars of a future not yet reached? The scroll was carbon dated. It was real. The ink, the fibers, the sediment layers, no forgery. Some said it was evidence of time travelers. Others believed it was a message from an alien race. But the most chilling theory, the one no one dared say aloud at first, was that the people of El Silencio had intentionally vanished. That they had buried their message, not for us to read, but to warn us not to. Still, decoding began. And as the language started to reveal its logic, people began to change. One by one. Subtly at first. Then violently. Because some messages aren't meant to be read. And some languages rewrite you as you read them. The first to die was a student. Her name was Amara Silva, 22 years old, top of her class at the University of Sao Paulo, brought on as a prodigious linguistic intern. Within days of arriving at El Silencio, she'd begun making rapid notes, compiling an internal logic to the glyph system. Her journal entries were feverish, obsessive, lines of repeated symbols, whole pages scrawled in ink that bled through the paper. She was found in her tent, face down. No bruises, no signs of violence. The autopsy showed no signs of a struggle, no drugs, no trauma. But the inside of her skull showed unexplained neurological damage, as if her brain had undergone extreme electrical overload. Her final note read, "I looked too long. They saw me looking back." It was ruled a psychological break. The project wasn't shut down. Within the month, 3 more researchers suffered breakdowns. One tore out his fingernails and screamed in an unknown language before vanishing into the jungle. Another attacked a colleague with a chisel, shouting that the glyphs were burning holes in the sky. A third, the lead cryptologist, slit his wrists and used his own blood to trace the symbols on the walls of his tent. His final phrase? "They're not dead. They're dreaming." This wasn't mere coincidence. Something was happening to those who studied the language. Not all at once, but gradually, like the creeping touch of a parasite that latched to the mind. It didn't kill with brute force. It rewrote perception. When footage from the excavation was reviewed by psychiatrists, a disturbing pattern emerged. All affected individuals had been working with the inner rings of the glyphic monolith. These were the densest, most complex symbols. Unlike the outer glyphs, which seemed to describe geography or astronomy, the inner symbols followed fractal and recursive patterns. Symbols inside symbols. Glyphs that mirrored themselves endlessly. Dr. Rainer Duval, a semiotician from Germany, proposed that the language was not linguistic at all, but mimetic. That is, it transmitted conceptual infection through its very structure, like a virus of meaning. In short, reading the glyphs changed your mind. Literally. And Duval had a theory, terrifying and disturbingly plausible. He proposed that the language of El Silencio was not meant to communicate with humans, but to change them. That it operated the way a computer virus does, executing a program by being seen or understood. He called it cognitive malware, a language designed to hack the human brain. That's when government stepped in. The Guatemalan authorities declared the site off-limits. The U.S. sent in a discreet team of DARPA specialists. Scrolls were confiscated. The monolith was cordoned off. And one night, without warning, it was removed entirely. Helicopters came at dusk. By morning, the monolith was gone. But the damage was done. The language had already been downloaded into minds. Dozens of researchers returned home with notes, sketches, photographic memories of the glyphs. Some tried to replicate the patterns. Some vanished entirely. And others, like Dr. Nadia El Amin, a leading expert in dead languages, began speaking only in the glyphs, scribbling symbols on every surface of her home until she was committed. When she died months later of unexplained cerebral hemorrhaging, her walls were found covered in spirals of glyphs that spiraled inward into a final, central phrase. They showed us how to erase ourselves. By now, an underground network of fringe theorists had formed. Online communities sharing decrypted symbols, posting breakdowns, even trying to speak the language aloud. Audio files emerged of phonetic interpretations. One infamous recording, known only as the Chant of El Silencio, is said to cause severe insomnia, hallucinations, and, in at least 2 cases, suicide. The academic community split. Some called it a mass hysteria event. Others insisted the evidence pointed to something far more profound. A pattern became undeniable. Those who got closest to deciphering the language died. But then, something unexpected happened. A computational linguist named Dr. Ezra Malik, using AI models and recursive decoding algorithms, claimed to have cracked part of the central message. He uploaded a PDF. It was pulled offline within 48 hours. His home was raided, and Malik disappeared. But his message leaked before the takedown. It was just one line, translated from the heart of the monolith. This is not history. This is prophecy. And it was dated, not from the past, but from the future. They called it the City of the Willing Dead. What archaeologists found beneath El Silencio was not the chaos of a civilization destroyed by surprise, nor the scatter of a people fleeing disaster. It was order, controlled, deliberate, and deeply disturbing. Every corpse was positioned. Not buried, not discarded, but arranged. Whole families found kneeling in circles, priests lying face down before the black monolith. Infants placed in shallow stone cradles, their skulls crushed with ceremonial precision. Bones were painted in mineral reds and blacks, signs of ritualized death, not battle. But no defensive walls had been breached. No weapons had been used. There were no signs of warfare or famine. They hadn't been killed. They had prepared. And this revelation shook the scientific community more than any curse or hallucination ever could, because it suggested something much darker. They chose this. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the timeline. The city's population, estimated at nearly 20,000, had slowly retreated inward. Suburbs were abandoned. Farms left to rot. Trade routes sealed. For nearly 2 years before the final moment, the civilization had turned completely inward, focusing all energy on ritual. They built shrines. They carved the language into every surface. Not just stone, but bone, bark, and obsidian. Some skulls bore glyphs directly etched into the forehead, suggesting a sacred or sacrificial function. The architecture itself shifted in those final years. Temples were no longer aligned to the sun or moon, but to a black void in the sky, an empty quadrant near the constellation Cetus. This dark alignment appeared again and again, culminating in one final construction, a subterranean chamber, sealed in obsidian. It contained no bodies. Only walls covered floor to ceiling in glyphs, centered around a 3-ring spiral that defied translation. Researchers named it the Chamber of Silence. It was in this chamber that they found a single obsidian bowl. Inside it, traces of human ash, powdered crystal, and what forensic teams would later confirm as neural tissue. The remains of a brain, reduced to ash and mixed into ritual compounds. The implication was horrifying. Had they burned their own minds as part of a final rite? For what purpose? To protect us from something? Or to escape it? Surviving artifacts suggest a type of controlled cultural suicide, but not one based in despair. The iconography shows celebration, ecstasy, even joy. Faces painted in luminous colors. Dancers mid-step. Flutes carved with depictions of stars spiraling inward. This was no act of desperation. It was transcendence, at least in their eyes. A handful of scholars compared it to modern death cults. Heaven's Gate, Jonestown, the thuggy sects of India. But El Silencio didn't follow a charismatic leader or respond to an external threat. It moved with the rhythm of collective purpose. A purpose rooted in the glyphs. Linguistic patterns suggest the symbols acted not just as a language, but as triggers, verbal or visual keys that unlocked states of altered consciousness. Similar to Tibetan seed syllables or the Solomonic magical alphabets, but infinitely others induced physical paralysis. And one specific pattern, dubbed the Spiral of Cessation, was found burned into the palms of over 300 bodies. This pattern, researchers believe, was the final message. A linguistic suicide code. The idea was unthinkable. A culture that had created a language not to preserve itself, but to erase itself completely. Not just from history, but from memory. A self-deleting civilization. And it worked. Nothing about their culture exists outside this one site. No legends. No trade records. No influence on surrounding cultures. They vanished from the record as if plucked from the timeline. But the glyphs remained. The final message wasn't meant for their own people. It was meant for us. A linguistic tombstone. A warning encrypted in suffering. A ritual designed to say, we saw what's coming. We chose silence. And perhaps most chilling of all, the glyphs show no fear. Not of death, not of pain, but of being remembered. Because memory is survival. And maybe survival is the real curse. At first glance, the glyphs of El Silencio seemed like any ancient script. Abstract shapes, deliberate carvings, some repeating, some rare. But as experts fed the symbols into advanced pattern recognition software, something unnerving surfaced. The symbols weren't static. They were moving. Not literally, of course. But when sequences were plotted into multidimensional matrices, they created patterns that morphed, shapes that evolved based on their position in the sequence. No ancient language on record had ever demonstrated this kind of behavior. It was as if the glyphs weren't symbols, but functions, tiny programs executed by the brain of the reader. And when these sequences were visualized, using fractal generators and neural mapping tools, they mirrored one thing above all else: the structure of the human brain. Neural pathways, dendritic trees, cortical folds. Some glyph sequences even aligned perfectly with fMRI brain scans. And not just generally, precisely. The implication was staggering. The language was shaped for the brain, not around it. As if whoever created it understood the architecture of human cognition at a level far beyond any known civilization. One linguist compared it to a mirror. Another, more bluntly, called it a mental scalpel. The AI was fed every known inscription from the site: monoliths, scrolls, bone carvings, murals. The results? The language wasn't just complex. It was recursive, self-correcting, and self-generating. Meaning, it evolved as it was read. The more you understood, the more the language changed to continue communicating with you, like a living organism adapting to your thoughts, or worse, reshaping them. The language behaved like a sentient algorithm, one that required consciousness to function, using the brain itself as a medium. One AI specialist quit the project the day after this discovery. He left only a note behind: "We didn't decode it. It decoded us." That's when the theory emerged, quietly at first, whispered among cryptographers and neurolinguists, and then leaked online in half-redacted academic forums. The language of El Silencio was never meant to be spoken aloud, because doing so might activate its full potential. One chilling case confirmed the fear. A group of amateur linguists, communicating via a hidden Discord server, attempted to recreate phonetic versions of the glyphs. Using AI-assisted pronunciation models, they built what they called the lexicon of the spiral voice. On a live stream, they began speaking it. Within 11 minutes, the feed cut off. 3 participants were later found dead. One had clawed out his own throat. The others appeared to have suffered seizures, though no known substance or external trauma was present. Their final audio logs captured just 3 minutes of the spoken glyphs, a low, layered chant, rising in harmonic tension until it collapsed into silence. The file, labeled verbatim_1, still exists. But those who've listened claim to hear something beneath the language, a second voice. Not human, not machine, whispering between the syllables. And so, the most terrifying possibility took shape. A tristar alignment only visible once every 12,600 years. In myth, this alignment is associated with cosmic return cycles, the Mayan long count, the Vedic yugas, and even Plato, an empty region of space notable for containing nothing. No stars, no dust, a gravitational anomaly with no name, only coordinates. The same coordinates carved into the final wall of the Chamber of Silence. It wasn't a destination. It was a source, a place from which the message had come. Whether it was a divine revelation, alien transmission, or self-generated apocalyptic consciousness, no one could say for sure. But one fact became undeniable. The language wasn't just dead. It was dormant, waiting, watching, for new hosts, for new minds. And the more we read, the more we gave it exactly what it wanted. The first full translation came from a machine, not a human. After years of failure, a military-funded project called Project Orpheus succeeded in building a non-human interpreter, an advanced neural net system trained to read, parse, and synthesize the glyphs of El Silencio without the risk of cognitive contamination. The goal was simple: extract the message without losing more minds. What they got back was not simple. The AI did not output a traditional translation. Instead, it produced a 40-page document, a blend of symbolic logic, apocalyptic metaphor, and unervingly specific predictions. At first, it was dismissed as nonsense, until someone noticed the pattern. It referenced future dates, specific ones, and one of those dates had already passed. March 9, 2022. The text claimed, "The fourth signal will be heard. The mouth will open beneath the sea. The dead city will rise." On March 9th, off the coast of Japan, a sonar anomaly was recorded, a sound unlike anything in marine history. A low, rumbling pulse from the deep Pacific. It triggered submarine sensors and research buoys across 3 nations. At the same time, satellites detected a sudden seismic shift on the ocean floor, forming a pattern eerily similar to the glyphic spiral found at El Silencio. Coincidence? Maybe, until the second date arrived. June 18, 2023. The AI translation had labeled this: "The fifth shape awakens in the sky. The dark light is named." That night, astronomers detected a gamma-ray burst from an unknown, previously dark quadrant of space, the same void the El Silencio temples had been aligned to. The burst was the longest on record. Its afterglow lasted days. And its location? Exactly the coordinates carved into the monolith's base. The glyphs hadn't been poetic. They'd been predictive. This changed everything. Project Orpheus was immediately shut down. Data wiped. The AI dismantled. But not before a whistleblower leaked the translation document to a darknet archive. It spread like wildfire under the name, the Codex of the Last Voice. And buried within it was a final, chilling passage. When they speak the last word aloud, the mouth of the world will open. The ones who came before will awaken again. Their echo is memory. Their voice is time. The glyph is not a language. It is a summoning. Scholars and spiritualists alike began interpreting the message in darker terms. If the glyphs were a code, not just of knowledge, but of invitation, then reading them was the ritual. Every interpretation, every decoding attempt, every human mind parsing the spiral was part of the ceremony. And it had already begun. Suddenly, researchers began experiencing identical visions. Unrelated people across the globe reporting the same dream. A black sky filled with spiral stars. A voice, mechanical yet ancient, speaking words no one could remember upon waking. A door, massive, stone, and wet with condensation, opening in the middle of the ocean. These dreams weren't random. EEG scans showed that the brains of those affected were firing in perfect synchronization, even across continents. As if connected by an unseen signal. As if listening. The glyphs weren't just speaking back. They were reacting. They responded to human attention, thriving on interpretation, multiplying in meaning the more we engaged. One researcher likened it to a conceptual organism, a parasite that spreads through cognition, seeking only to be understood. Because understanding was the key, and that's when the sixth and final date from the translation was discovered. Still to come. November 11th, 2025. Labeled only as, "The door will not be closed." What happens then? No one knows. But the glyphs seem certain. The spiral ends there. There are no more messages beyond that date. No more predictions. Just one final warning, repeated 3 times at the end of the codex. If you hear it, do not listen. If you see it, do not read. If you read, do not understand. Underscore. And for those who already have, it may already be too late. In the end, the people of El Silencio didn't die from plague, war, or conquest. They didn't fall. They chose to disappear. And now, we may finally understand why. After the leaked codex swept through the internet, governments scrambled to contain what they called a Level 5 cognitive hazard. Intelligence agencies worldwide, many of whom had dismissed the El Silencio phenomenon as academic sensationalism, launched coordinated shutdowns of archive sites, encrypted the AI decoding models, and quarantined any physical copies of the glyphs. But it was already too late. Once seen, the glyphs lived inside you. Once decoded, they reshaped the decoder. Researchers began describing something that mirrored the rituals of El Silencio, a desire to erase, to withdraw, to leave no trace. Some sold their homes, deleted all social media, vanished off the grid. Not in panic, but in peace. As if something had convinced them that the only answer was silence. They weren't running from danger. They were running toward it. Some even carved spirals into stone, bark, and bone, modern echoes of an ancient ritual. The same glyphs, the same symbols, the same spiral of cessation. They had heard the language's call, and obeyed. This was no longer just about archaeology. It was a virus of intent, a kind of informational euthanasia. And the evidence pointed to a disturbing conclusion. The people of El Silencio weren't the first. Across the world, isolated discoveries began resurfacing. In the deep Sahara, a buried sandstone obelisk bearing similar spiral glyphs. In the Arctic Circle, a cave sealed in ice, its walls etched with patterns that triggered identical hallucinations in all who viewed them. And in the Andaman Trench, a second monolith, blacker than the first, yet untouched by time. Each artifact shared the same design philosophy: not to warn, not to communicate, but to delete. A protocol of erasure. A universal kill switch embedded in language. Somewhere in our distant past, or perhaps from beyond it, something was discovered. Something ancient and intelligent. Something we were never meant to understand. And every civilization that glimpsed it chose the same fate. They wrote it down. They read too far. And they vanished. What does that say about us? Already, signs are appearing. The November 11th date draws closer. Online forums that once buzzed with theories and speculation have gone dark. Accounts deactivated. Threads deleted. It's as if the glyph itself is scrubbing its own trail from history, just as it always does. And maybe that was the true purpose all along. Not to be remembered, but to ensure no one ever remembers them. Not by war, not by disaster, but by choice. A final, desperate act of control over the uncontrollable. A suicide not of flesh, but of identity. So now, here we stand, at the edge of the spiral. The glyph has been spoken. The warnings have been read. The message has been received. What remains is a question. Will we be the first to resist, or the next to vanish? We often think of history as a record, a lineage of facts, dates, and names preserved across time. But what if the most important histories are the ones that aren't meant to survive? The story of El Silencio is not just one of ancient mystery. It is a mirror, held up to our deepest fear, the fear that knowledge, once gained, cannot be unlearned. That some truths are not meant to be uncovered, not because they are false, but because they are too true. This wasn't a lost language. It was an intentional disappearance, a suicide note written across centuries, encoded in spirals and glyphs, echoing the ultimate human paradox, our desire to understand and our terror at what we might find. They didn't just choose silence. They became it. And now, with the last date approaching, November 11th, 2025, we are faced with the same decision. Read on, or look away. Decode the glyph, or forget it ever existed. Because if the message is true, then understanding it means becoming part of it. A glyph in a spiral that never ends. So if you made it this far, ask yourself, have you already read too far? If this story gripped you, disturbed you, or made you think, subscribe to the channel for more shocking tales from the edges of forgotten history. Comment below, would you choose silence or truth? And if you're brave enough, watch this next. The island where the sun never rose again. The spiral continues. Some messages never die. They just wait.